Thanks. I'm just trying to sort out my tech, and Wade gave me a bit of a topic that feels like that "What's My Line" improv. He gave me a title, he gave me some hints about what he wanted to speak about, but basically the topic is the role of analysis in trying to figure out a way out of this mess. And I'm going to start with a simpler question, which is, what's the role of analysis and how can we use it in the context of what we've heard today, and what might be a bit confusing to an audience that was thinking things are pointing to a solution. So you can get a little more of what happens in a university setting when we start to work on these problems, and when we start to face a diversity of views about not necessarily just the root causes of a problem, but what's the path forward, because often there aren't simple solutions. And then I'll finish with, if I don't get beeped out by my own timer, how should we be using analysis, which is a much harder question. So from the starting point, I'm just going to refer to analysis, information, and evidence as things that we use that are intended to improve decision making. So when I come in as an economist and I've been asked to talk to someone, I think that's my role, is just to say, what do we know, what can we say, and how does this help you make a decision? What I don't do, and what economists should not do, is make decisions for a society. That's not our role. Our role is really to identify the trade-offs that the decision makers need to be aware of when they choose option 1 over option 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. You saw that today in spades with Trevor's work, with the CARE work that's been done over and over. Lawrence Booth had some great statistics. Jim Stanford used similar analysis and data, but very different conclusions, as did Kerry Murray. All of the presentations were fantastic examples of using evidence and analysis to form a decision. The problem you have in the room is the politician's decision. Which one do you pick? They're all really good analyses, and the difficulty is they all have different costs and benefits for people based on if you follow Jim's advice versus if you went with Lawrence Booth's or perhaps with Trevor's. They differ in feasibility. Do you want to go fight with Ottawa, or do you just want to do something? And so again, what we always have to appreciate is that decision makers have a really tough job. And I think Danny Williams was bringing that up. And it's not just when you're kicked out of office. As you learn in Newfoundland, you get hung with decisions often till your dying days and beyond, when the historians get a hold of you as well. So these are big, lasting choices you have to make. The other thing we often forget is that a plurality of views is a good thing. We should be more nervous when everyone agrees that this is the cause and that this is the solution. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, something's about to hit us and we should run. But in other cases, it's more complicated than that. And we need to be testing what we believe and what we know, and making sure that the evidence is as solid as we believe. And so that's an important part of a university environment, that you need to have contested ideas, not moving towards consensus by design. And so that's been something that's been lost lately, that plurality of views, disagreement, has been taken as a sign of a problem, and it's not. That's what we need to be doing in order to get better decisions made. The other thing we forget is that, as Danny Williams reminded us today, they make decisions before they know what the world's going to look like. We are familiar with this when we make our own choices, as simple as, what car should I buy? Is it a lemon? If I buy the wrong car, I feel sad, and if I buy the right car, I feel pretty good. Did I pay the right price? We agonize over these decisions, but then when you have someone trying to decide, how do I start the economy, we think that it's going to be an easy decision, even though it's going to have huge implications for how you do things. So we have to think about that the timing of the decision context that someone's going to do, you don't know how the world's going to unfold. You don't know what the other players in the game are going to do, but you're trying to make your best decision for your constituents or your population as you go forward. And you also have to remember that you need to understand, when you make the decision, who's going to bear the costs. And there's two dimensions to it. One is, it may be the vulnerable that take a hit, as was brought up with tuition policy. No administrator in the world makes tuition policy decisions lightly. No government likes to take those decisions lightly. And so there's a lot of thinking that goes into, is this the best way to do it? What can we do to offset it? But something has to be done in the near term when you're not allowed to carry deficits and borrowing. So you do force hands into making decisions when you do these things, and analysis is always part of that. The other thing to remember, costs are going to be borne in the front with investment, and the benefits may or may not come in the future. And so we have to always remember that there's a timing thing to it, that at the time you made the decision, it might have been the right one, but then you had a pandemic. Did anyone know there was a pandemic coming in fall of 2019 when they were making decisions about travel? So a lot of us got hung with we didn't know what was going to happen with airline credits and things like that. Again, small scale, but we're familiar with these problems about we don't know what the world's going to be. So this is where analysis gets tricky. It can be used in the way that Wade and Kerr have been trying to do, which is to help in real time, upfront, informed decisions. So in a way, if you want to think about sports, it's a really boring pregame show. What the analysis is going to do is it's going to tell you what the possible outcome of the game would be based on different parameters or different conditions of the players, or what you would expect to see for success to occur, like markets will have to go up to a price of $150 a barrel versus 60. But you can't say with certainty who's going to win because there's a bunch of things that are going to happen once the game is played. So I'm going to give Wade, Doug, and Kerr credit for taking the hard job, which is to try and be informing up front. Me as an economic historian, I take a different tack. That's a hard game, what they're doing. I wait for the game to be played, and then I do the boring post-game. I tell you who scored more goals. I tell you who was a star on the field, who really came up lackluster. The role that I'm doing is I'm going to inform the next decision maker. I'm going to take the world like I knew with certainty how it was going to be played out. I'm going to do an analysis, and then I'm going to use that to tell you best practice the next time. Even though, as I'm going to get to, I think that's a completely flawed perspective on how the decision should be evaluated. Sorry, wait, I just lost my timer. I want to make sure I don't go over. So we can think about using analysis before the game to help tell the coach who should be your lines, who should be on the ice first, who should be on the ice last. We'll tell you what you might want to think about with line matching and advice like that. We're still not the coach. We're still not the player. And if we lose the game, we kind of walk away and say, well, that was rough. But the coach gets fired. And we always have to remember that our advice, if we push too hard and we really don't know, we could be guilty of doing as much damage, but we don't bear the consequences. So we also have to be aware of that ethical dimension of the advice we give. It can also be used to do ex post things, and these are the fun ones. So since I've moved to New Brunswick, a popular topic that people still talk about was joining Confederation a mistake? Most of the rest of the country has moved on. They don't even realize there is Confederation. So if you go to Toronto or Quebec, once in a while they're perplexed that there's these other places called regions asking for things. And so here we seem to try the past with an idea that it might somehow help the future. And again, analysis is useful for that, but then you always have to think about what's the implication, and the one that's being talked about more and more with this testing the past on Confederation is maritime union. It's coming up more and more in New Brunswick because you haven't talked about it here in the conference today, but merger of bankrupt entities is one solution so that you have a larger entity that might be considered solvent in future, or agreeing to a federal condition as they did in 1867. They agree to take all your existing debts so that you got a clean sheet to start over. Loan guarantees are good for that. These are policies we haven't talked about, that you can buy your way out of this, but the timing may not be right. And it may not be the one that aligns with the values of the province, because self-sufficiency and sovereignty of policy is an important value in societies. So again, one of the dimensions I want to bring up with analysis, there's a bit of a counter-cyclical demand for it. What Wade and Doug and I have encountered is that when governments were flush and things were pretty good and the economy's booming, no one really wants to talk to us. No one's asking, is this a good decision? Because everyone knows what the best decision is. And it's because when you suffer a loss, it's not a big deal. We're still in the game. We can gamble again. We can put it on black this time instead of red. And if it pays off, we're good again. What starts to happen over time is the economy cools off, the losses mount, and pretty soon you have to tell the spouse what you've been up to and that the hole's a little bigger than you thought. And so now you get nervous, so you call us up and you say, what can we do? And so the options that we're often talking to them about is they say, we want to double down, and we start saying, maybe you should walk away from the table, and that becomes unpopular. And so if you start thinking about these analogies about how analysis is used, we would argue it's used too late. And it's often used extremely late, which is when the disasters happen, we're brought in to help someone decide whose fault was it. Because people don't like that it was just bad luck or it didn't work out like we thought. It's much easier if there's a villain. Somebody did something, somebody had inside information, they took us for a ride, and that one is simpler to sell than, wow, who knew oil prices were going to collapse that quick? Who knew we would have a Paris Agreement that would take an entire sector we've been building for 20 years potentially out of play? How hard should we pivot? And a whole bunch of things like that. So when you look at these things, if you want to judge a decision, was it a mistake? The way to ask it, taking account of the horizon that you have, I've just got to check my timing quick because I think I'm running out, is instead of looking back and saying, in hindsight, we know exactly what happened, you blew it because you suffered costs, not benefits. Ask the decision maker, like Danny Williams was saying today, knowing what you know today, if you were to go back at that time, would you make the same decision again? Which is not the same way asking, would you do it differently? It's really asking, given the information you had and the context that was there, was it the right decision at the time? And those are the hardest ones to defend because most of us find it easier to do hindsight. It was clearly the wrong thing to do because, look, it was a cost, not a benefit. But at the time when you're in those shoes, was that the right thing? And we'll often hear leaders after the fact saying they still believe it was the right decision. And I just want to leave you with the thought, they're not wrong. We don't know if it was a bad decision because we weren't there to make it. So I want to finish by answering Wade's question, how should we use analysis? And I'll just say yes, it should be used. And it should be used for evidence-based decision-making like it was 20 years ago, not for policy-based evidence-making as it's being used more and more today. Most of the demands we get for analysis are after the campaign trail, after the decisions have been made about what the policy will be. And the usual request is tell us if this is a good way to do it or another way. They tell us, what's the way we can communicate to the public that we're doing this and it's in their best interest? And that isn't how analysis should be used from an academic institution, at least. There's a good consulting world that can do all that, and we should leave that business for them. Now, the bigger problem, and I just want to speak to the importance of CARE and Wade and Doug, as Wade's pre-announced Doug's retirement for him today, is that we're hitting a point where we have more need for analysis at the regional level that we've ever had. And as CARE potentially winds down a bit without the assets of Wade and Doug, if we don't replenish that manpower, sorry, Madam President, to bring this up, but if we don't have that capacity at a time where the region needs it, not Canada, the region, we're going to be having major decisions made for us by analysts in central Canada who really may or may not care about the interests of the region. And so as decisions, instead of being a partner at the table, trying to figure out what's the best way to navigate forward in Canadian Confederation, more and more you're going to see analysis used to make decisions about you. And that's why it's important to make the investment in the regional decision analysis capacity. And if you do lose that, you're going to basically be on your back foot quite a bit because no one knows the regional economy like people who are working in it. And that's why I pitch for capacity, why you need a CARE, why you need a Harris Center, why you need a MUN, is that that's the capacity that U of T can't duplicate, and they won't duplicate it. So I'll get off the soapbox, Wade, and let you finish with your pitch.
Thank you, Herb. We're very cognizant of time, so if you haven't learned anything from what you saw here today, that's one thing we do take seriously. We tell you you'll be finished before 5, you'll be finished before 5. What I will say to you is that all of the presentations, all of the speaking notes, all of the videos of everything you saw here today will be online. And if you register for the conference, we will send you an email telling you exactly how you can get it. It'll take about 2 weeks to do this stuff. In addition to that, what you get as well is we have a substantial set of data so that you can make your own decisions. You saw Pat and others use data that we provided to them. We provided to them because we wanted people to be able to make your own decisions about what these kinds of issues are. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different indicators one could use to look at population or to look at the fiscal situation. So we're not going to go through, so since this stuff is here, and it will be online for you. I'm not going to not going to spend a lot of time doing these kinds of, there's lots of little slides here. I tried to put slides in there that were different than what you saw before. This here just shows you, certainly Newfoundland's credit rating is red on the bottom, and they're from low to high, and low is bad. So what you see there is that Newfoundland happens to be, no matter which one you look at, and no matter how you describe it, it happens to be doing that well. So what I'm going to do is I would ask you to, if you're interested in these kinds of things, have a look at this here when it comes out in terms of the information coming available on the website. Look at something called the Emery report. You'll be surprised, because the words that if you didn't know it was 1933, you would think you're now, somebody's describing now, and that should cause you a lot of concern. So let me just jump to the conclusions. I mean, like, we can go through these this is the kind of stuff that we do all the time in the basement, just trying to have some kind of social life, but this is what we do. But I don't want to spend any time on these kind of things now, because you can access these, and we'll give you more data than you can possibly hope to ever want. Okay, that's a promise. Okay. So let me just. I'm not going to go through these things here. You can go through them and look at them at your leisure. I just want to send to the conclusions. Okay, so it's important to you understand data is one thing. How you weight data is another thing. Okay, so it's one thing to know the facts. That's important to know, right? But I want you to understand there's a substantial degree of subjectivity into determining whether or not you have a fiscal crisis or a fiscal problem. It's not, if you hit X, you got a fiscal problem, okay? But what we can tell you is that there's a substantial amount of data. We can put it in terms of GDP, we can put it in terms of per capita. There's a substantial amount of data that shows you that we have a problem. And that's what the minister was saying today. So the minister was telling you that they recognize they have a problem, and more than that, she also said to you that they've got a plan for how to move forward. So I think what someone said, I think it was Ed, was saying, walk the walk. So she talked the talk, and she looks like she's going to walk the walk. So we'll see how that actually comes about. What I want you to understand is that we talk about these things, like Pat talked about health, Kathy talked about population and population strategies and those kind of things, and we typically talk about fiscal kinds of things as if they're independent. They're not independent. So the fiscal problem is compounded by the demographic problem. Right? It's been exacerbated by the fact that people actually leave the province, and the people who leave the province, as Pat told you earlier on, were, during the moratorium, were the young, productive people who would be having children. So that translates into what? It translates into a smaller population, an older population, less able to meet the needs in terms of labor force, those kind of things. So fiscal makes it difficult for people to stay. They leave. When they leave, they have other implications, and that's true within the province as well, intra-provincial kinds of things. So people have moved a lot from rural parts of the province to urban parts of the province. So climate change, the other thing I want to make sure that people understand, whether you like oil or hate oil or think it's evil or whatever it is you think, what climate change initiatives are doing is going to make it very difficult for the oil and gas sector in this particular area to continue on making the contributions made in terms of the fiscal contribution to this province. Okay? It is, if you in 2035 talk about no more combustion engines to be sold in Canada, it means that you don't need a demand for oil at that point in time. So there's a limited time in which you can make some kind of impact here. And so it's important that you understand that there are lots of initiatives that are going on that will impact the ability for us to deal with the fiscal situation, okay? We're going to need to know precise trade-offs, and that's where research comes in and analysis comes in, and recognizing the problems are all interconnected. So demographics are tied to the economy. People leave without meaningful careers. You want people to stay? You bring people in through immigration? You want them to stay? Give them a meaningful career. It's not good enough to bring them in, because you bring them in and they have meaningful careers elsewhere and they can move, they will move. It's not complicated, right? So demographics are tied to the economy, right? Economic activity is tied to labor force availability. So people are, so if you have technology like Kendra McDonald was telling you about, and you don't have people who can do those kinds of things, then it will go somewhere else, right? So it's important to understand that economic activity is tied to demographics and opportunities within the province. Revenues available to government and expenditure needs are tied to demographics. So we have done a lot of work, myself and Doug, on these kinds of issues. So once you get past a certain age, the amount, and I think it was Kathy or somebody said to say, about how much income tax you actually pay as you get older. It significantly goes down, and we're getting older. It's not a bad thing, it's just telling you that's what's happening. These are a matter of facts. What we do need is a vision, okay? The Green Report gave you a vision. Whether you accept that a vision or not is a different issue, okay? We can have all kinds of views about that, right? We have to know where we want to go. I do a lot of walking. And so what I found out is it's less important if I start off with my left foot or my right foot, so long as I start off and I know I want to go in a particular direction and I know certain targets that I got to meet. So I'll turn here, I'll stop here, I'll watch for cars here, and I'll hold my breath as I go up this hill here, because there's those kind of things. So you need a vision and you need a real plan, okay? A real plan, but how we're going to get there. And while we're going to go that way, what are we going to meet? What are reasonable targets to meet? Okay? So we need openness and transparency. So people talked about the rate mitigation thing today. We need to know clearly what those kind of things mean to you specifically. And I will tell you that I have a hard time understanding, and you might say obviously, but I have a hard time understanding what that really means. And there are people in the room who studied that quite a bit as well. Any real adjustment path, what you need to understand as well, and we can sugarcoat this any way you want to do it. Any real adjustment path will involve a lower standard of living. Unambiguous, okay? But we want to do it in a controlled way that's appropriate. There's no silver bullet. Technology will help. So you can live here and work anywhere. You can also work anywhere and live here. So if you like ice and snow and slush in your boots in the winter, this is a good place. If you like sun and warm rain, California might be a better place. But the point being is that there's no silver bullet. Okay? We always want to have something easy. We want to say, okay, there's a silver bullet and things are going to be easy. In the end, we need a vibrant economy with meaningful jobs and public services that we can afford and for which we're prepared to pay. Like, we don't tell you that you should have more or less expenditure. If you're going to want to have more expenditure, you should be prepared to pay for it. If you're not prepared to pay for it, then you shouldn't expect somebody else to pay for it. Newfoundland's done quite well in terms of per capita transfers coming from the federal government. We have done really, really well, okay? I know people are concerned about equalization. We can have those kinds of debates. Not a problem, right? We need to have a real conversation about how we move forward from here. This particular forum was meant to be the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. Unfortunately, myself and Doug won't be doing much more of these kinds of things, okay? But so it is for others to pick up. And so did we cross everything here? We didn't. A lot of things we didn't do here. A lot of people we could have invited. We couldn't do it from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening. We couldn't do it. Now, that doesn't mean we're saying they're less important. These are the things we thought were important enough to bring forward right now. These were the things we thought were good to have. We thought it was important to have the government come and tell us what they think they're going to be doing. We thought education and healthcare were important. We thought technology was important. We thought family things were important. We wanted people to understand things about bonds and those kinds of issues. We wanted people to understand, okay, what can we do to change fiscal federalism? Right? Because the person that we had there was probably the top guy in Canada for that, just so you get a sense of it. We brought these people in specifically because they were the top people in the country, right? Pat and Elizabeth are doing something that's really, really important for all of us. And we want to give them a chance to help you understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. Okay? So I think I'm going to stop there. I just want you to understand that, we, myself and Doug and Scott Lynch, as part of CARE, enjoy doing these kinds of things. But now it's time for someone else to start doing it. And if you don't do it, then you'll be making decisions in a vacuum. It's not complicated. And I'm going to stop there. If there's any questions or comments, we'll try to answer them for you. We don't shy away from things because they're political, just so you know. But we don't get political. Questions or comments?
I'll make a quick comment.
You go ahead, sir. And by the way, just before we go on, myself and Herbert is just flexible fillers, just so you get a sense of it. If you understand what that means. Okay.
Okay. Paul Wilson again. Wade, I don't think we need more data. We've got whacks and whacks and whacks of data.
And you'll have more when you...
We need more information. And
Yes.
transferring data into information is your job. It's our job. But we have to take the data and turn it into something that informs the public.
Sure.
Most of the data that we have, the raw data, doesn't inform, and it overwhelms.
Yep.
So it's a task of saying, how can we take the data and turn it into meaningful information? When I did my doctoral work on who goes to Memorial and how did they do, I discovered I didn't have to generate any data. It was all there. But nobody had actually sat down and said, how can we turn this data into information about who we bring in and how we do it? And I suspect it's the same in lots of businesses, etc. My final comment would be, to my 45-year history at Memorial, as a student, as a faculty member, as an administrator, I don't think we have ever done a value for money audit. And so I'm asking you, are you aware of Memorial ever doing a value for money audit?
I am not. What we did do was economic impacts, and I haven't seen the study that the president talked about, the new one they have out, so that could be something, but I've not seen it, no. You want to say something? Go ahead. Okay. But again, it's important to understand what the value of the university is to the community. So that is important to know, and it's not insignificant, right? You know, so the easy thing to do is look at economic impacts. Those are easier to do. The value of a degree in terms of making it a bigger holistic contribution is something different completely yet again. And yes, those kind of things should be done. Unfortunately, at our age, we're not going to be doing them, but somebody else might do them. That's the young person's job right now. You want to say something, Herb?
Yeah, Wade and CARE previously ran an entire conference on the role of the university in peripheral economies. It was a terrific conference. It's online. And the other thing you want to see how important a university is, Laurentian is running a live experiment on what happens when you put your university at risk. And one thing I'll point out is what distinguishes a province from a territory is one institution. Territories don't have universities. Provinces do. And so that's a case where it's an extremely valuable institution. The questions about could it be doing things that are more along different values that the population may be developing is a different question. But it's tough to do the experiment. If you blew up a university today, what would the impact be on the economy? It would be devastating. You would lose your whole forward trajectory on innovation. One of the things to remember is that institutions have to be renewed, and what's happening with austerity in universities is we're not renewing the faculty. Retirements are going, we're not replacing with the dynamic new professors. If I had a gambling play for Newfoundland, with all the talent that's wandering around now with no tenure track positions in North America and globally, if you had 100, 200 positions and could just snap them up now, you'd be doing what UBC is doing, what the other big players with endowments are doing. And that's triggering the innovation cycle in a lot of those places. Small universities are getting stuck being dependent on public revenues. They aren't able to do that renewal. So if whatever you can do to renew the faculty complement at the university, just get it going, and that'll be a pump that gets you some early returns. It'll be a way of invigorating more enrollment. Students will want to come, and it's a playbook that you can see across the country. So my pitch for Memorial, get hiring.
Any other comments before we leave? And we thank you for coming. It's been a long day. We appreciate that. And, you know, like I said, we will send you emails with respect to all of this information we said will be available to you. It will be available to you. One thing we do, we practice openness and transparency. So we tell you what we're going to do, and we do it. So thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.